General Hospital spoilers indicate that Cain will be shot between September 1st and 5th, so might his daughter, Scout Quartermaine, be the one who pulls the trigger? Fans had a feeling a whodunit scenario was on the way for Drew for a long time, but, as numerous characters have threatened his life in the last week or so, it's become evident that the cutthroat congressman will be assaulted in some form very soon. The ABC drama released its weekly peek, and it appears that Drew will be shot somewhere in the next 4 days. Whether Drew dies remains to be seen, but according to the promo video, Anna Devane and Dante Falconeri will be on the case, and they have a slew of suspects to sort through. Drew has made numerous enemies in the little town in recent months, including Curtis Ashford, Portia Robinson, Michael Corinthos, Nina Reeves, Carly Spencer, and Sonny Corinthos. Even Jen Sidwell recently stated that Drew was expendable, and Sidwell is the type of character who dislikes leaving loose ends, so fans should consider him a suspect. Having said that, daytime drama viewers understand that any decent whodunit. Throughout the tale, the murderer is always someone no one expects. Here's where Scout comes in. She's a nice, innocent little girl who is compassionate, loving, and always does the right thing. Still, the child has seen a great deal of trauma in less than a year, and her father has given little attention to her throughout this time. He has also been a significant source of her stress. Scout lost her mother, Sam McCall, on Halloween last year and has seen a flurry of upheaval since. Drew grabbed her from the Quartermaine home and away from her brothers, Danny Morgan and Rocco Falconeri. Shortly thereafter, she was thrust into a new blended family with Willow Tate and her children. While Scout is linked to and familiar with Wiley and Amelia Corinthos, adjusting to a new routine with other children must have been difficult. Willow, Wiley, and Amelia came and went as soon as they came, and Scout must have found it difficult to witness Willow's huge moment at the altar on the day of her wedding to Drew. The young girl lost more individuals in her life as a result of her father's terrible decisions. Add in the fact that she is no longer permitted to spend time with Monica Quartermaine or Alexis Davis, and the girl may snap. She recently attempted to contact Danny, but Drew exaggerated the entire thing. Instead of listening to Scout, her father doubled down, and the little girl is now utterly estranged from her family, with the exception of her dad. Scout may find this position too hard to bear, so will she take matters into her own hands literally? General Hospital spoilers state that when it comes to murder mysteries in Port Charles, fans should always expect the unexpected, and Scout being the one to shoot Drew is both out of the ordinary and highly believable. General Hospital spoilers say that 6 Cain shooting suspects were revealed in the show's preview film for the week of September 1st to 5th, but more are on the way. Let's start with the 6 characters mentioned in the promo because GH opted to cast suspicion on them initially. After Drew is shot, Anna Devane and Dante Falconeri will discuss who is at the top of the suspect list. GH's weekly preview includes several fast flashes of persons who may have pulled the bullet on Drew, beginning with Portia Robinson. Portia has been pushed to her limits recently, so could she go so far as to try to kill Drew for good? Trina Robinson will be shaken in the next episodes, so she may receive updates on Drew's unexpected news and become concerned about her mother's activities. Sonny Corinthos fatally shot John Jagger Cates on the Quartermaine property, demonstrating his willingness to go to extremities to eliminate a danger. That doesn't necessarily mean Sonny will be found guilty of going after Drew, but the PCPD will still consider him a suspect in the upcoming whodunit. Sonny has been raving about Drew getting what he deserves, therefore he will be questioned following Drew's ordeal. Willow Tate appears to be turning on Drew all over again, landing in suspicious area. Willow has recently demonstrated that she is unstable and out of control, so we can easily envision her pursuing revenge on Drew for ruining her life. Curtis Ashford is another suspect mentioned in the weekly teaser, which is unsurprising given his previous threats on Drew's life. Curtis is clearly willing to go to any length to protect his family, thus he will be on the PCPD's list when they do an investigation. In addition to worrying about Portia, Trina may be afraid of what Curtis could have done. In other words, Trina may have valid reasons to mistrust one or both of her parents in the upcoming episodes. Nina Reeves made the initial suspect list, which is unsurprising given that she also threatened Drew's life. After all the grief Drew has caused Willow, we wouldn't be surprised if this mama bear tries to eliminate him. The detectives will investigate what Nina did that night, so she may be to fault for targeting Drew. Even if Nina isn't to blame, she could cause a disaster if she covers for Willow or someone else. Michael Corinthos is the final suspect in the preview video, thus he will also be investigated in this case. Michael despises Drew and wants him gone, so the cops will undoubtedly question how far he would go to make that happen. Michael may not be the guilty party, but the purpose of a whodunit is to spread suspicion and push the plot to unexpected places. There will be some false turns on the road, but it is all part of the plan. Of course, there will be additional suspects to examine as the plot progresses. Alexis Davis, Carly Spencer, Tracy Quartermaine, Martin Gray, Jen Sidwell, and others from Port Charles may face questions. The calm buzz of Port Charles was interrupted by a gunshot that rang through the streets, a sound that would quickly become the talk of the town. Drew Cain, the once admired Navy SEAL turned lawmaker, lay injured as a result of a stunning act of violence. The question on everyone's mind was simple but profound: who pulled the trigger? As the people of this close-knit but drama-filled neighborhood struggled with the mystery, suspicion landed on an unlikely figure, Drew's little daughter, Scout Quartermaine. Could a child, caught up in the maelstrom of grief and upheaval, truly be capable of such a terrible act? The ideas seemed absurd, but the evidence was piling, and the town's collective imagination was going wild. Drew Cain's trip to Port Charles had been anything but easy. Many saw him as a villain after his recent deeds, despite being a man of honor at one time. His political ambitions, deceptive plans, and strained relationships had resulted in a vast number of foes, each with their own reasons for wanting him out of the picture. The causes for his actions were numerous, ranging from separated family members to scorned lovers and abandoned allies. However, no one expected Scout, a young girl still grieving the loss of her mother, Sam McCall, to take such an extreme move. The concept challenged the town's sense of loyalty, loss, and the extent a youngster will go when pushed to the brink. Scout's life has been full with turbulence. The death of her mother on Halloween the previous year left a gap that no one could fill. Sam's death, a terrible heart attack caused by a liver donation to save Lulu Spencer, had shattered Scout's life. She was only a child, but her sadness was heightened by her father's actions. Drew, in his pursuit of power and new relationships, had uprooted Scout from the Quartermaine estate. He had separated her from her brothers, Danny Morgan and Rocco Falconeri, and put her into a new life with Willow Tate and her two children, Wiley and Amelia Corinthos. The adjustment was abrupt, and just as Scout began to adjust, Willow's sudden withdrawal from the altar during her wedding to Drew left her reeling once more. Drew's decisions further added to her sense of isolation in the face of constant turmoil. Scout's relationship with the Quartermaine family, which had formerly provided warmth and security, had deteriorated. Drew's actions separated him from his adoptive mother, Monica Quartermaine, and Scout's maternal grandmother, Alexis Davis. Monica, a pillar of the Quartermaine lineage, had become disillusioned with Drew's actions. His effort to bulldoze the family crypt, where his grandparents Edward and Lila Quartermaine and father Alan Quartermaine were buried, was a betrayal that wounded deep. Monica, ill and fragile, had been Scout's guiding light, but Drew's actions had shattered that bond. Similarly, Alexis, a devoted protector of her granddaughter, was banned from seeing Scout, which fueled her rage at Drew. The small girl, caught in the crossfire of adult tensions, had no one to turn to, and her world shrank as her father's goals expanded. As the inquiry into Drew's shooting got underway, Port Charles was abuzz with gossip. Anna Devane, the town's astute police commissioner, and Dante Falconeri, a detective with a personal interest in the case, were tasked with solving the mystery. The suspect list was long and varied, with each name bearing its own weight in terms of motive. Sonny Corinthos, the local mob boss, had clashed with Drew over his attempts to drive him out of town and replace him with a more brutal figure, Jen Sidwell. Drew's nephew, Michael Corinthos, harbored resentment toward Drew for manipulating his son Wiley, a cruel act in which Drew told the boy that Michael did not want him. Drew blackmailed Portia Robinson, a psychiatrist with a grudge, after he falsely accused her of a ketamine drugging. Nina Reeves, Willow's mother and Drew's former girlfriend, had her own reasons to dislike him, as did Curtis Ashford, Portia's husband, who was preparing to expose Drew's plots. The motives were as complicated as the relationships in Port Charles, and the cops were having trouble narrowing down the possibilities. Despite the sea of candidates, Scout's name emerged as a startling possibility. The concept was first discussed in whispers, a theory so bizarre that it appeared nearly ludicrous. Scout, a toddler barely old enough to comprehend the nuances of her father's conduct, had endured more than most adults could stomach. Her mother's death, her father's neglect, and the frequent instability in her life had rendered her susceptible. The last straw came when Drew, enraged, overreacted to Scout's attempt to reunite with her brother Danny. Danny, a teenager dealing with his own sadness, had taken Scout from summer camp to the Quartermaine mansion, a sight that still evoked recollections of brighter days. When Drew learned this, he threatened to arrest Danny, further alienating Scout from her father. The already frail little girl was pushed beyond her limits. The hypothesis that Scout could be the shooter gained traction as additional information became available. General Hospital spoilers indicated of a whodunit scenario that would shock the town, with Scout's involvement characterized as a twist that fans should expect the unexpected from. The concept was not novel in Port Charles, where even the youngest individuals had been known to act out in severe ways. Scout's access to a gun seemed plausible. Port Charles was a city where firearms were never far away, and Drew's reckless actions could have left one in her possession. Perhaps she had discovered a firearm in their home, a souvenir from Drew's Navy SEAL days or a tool for his political ambitions. The vision of Scout, small and terrified, carrying a gun was frightening, but not impossible. The emotional toll on Scout was evident. She'd lost her mother, her house, and her sense of safety. Drew's obsession with his congressional career and his complicated sexual relationships with Willow and Nina had made Scout seem like an afterthought. His choice to relocate her to Washington, D.C., away from the only family she had remaining, was the ultimate betrayal. Alexis, in particular, was enraged, pledging to fight for custody to keep Scout in Port Charles. Scout was stuck in the middle, divided between her father and the family she wished to return to. The agony of being uprooted again, of losing the last vestiges of her mother's memories, could have led Scout to an act of desperation. As Anna and Dante investigated deeper, they discovered clues leading to Scout. A witness reported seeing a small individual near the shooting site, their face hidden but their size matching with that of a youngster. A discarded toy, one of Scout's favorites, was discovered near where Drew was shot, which shocked the detectives. The thought that Scout acted out of rage or fear was heartbreaking, but it could not be ignored. Anna, a grandmother herself, addressed the theory with caution, aware of the consequences of blaming a kid. Dante, Scout's stepfather through his connection with Sam, was divided between his responsibilities as a detective and his feelings for the girl he had helped raise. The investigation had taken a personal turn, and the truth was proving difficult to uncover. The town's response to the theory was varied. Some, like Alexis, refused to think Scout was capable of such an act. She said Scout was a victim of Drew's negligence, not a perpetrator of violence. Others, such as Tracy Quartermaine, who had her own reasons to dislike Drew, were more open to the idea. Tracy, ever the pragmatist, observed that children in Port Charles have been known to surprise even the most experienced locals. The possibility that Scout might have cracked under the weight of her circumstances was not unreasonable, especially considering the town's history of dramatic twists. Social media was buzzing with fan hypotheses, with hashtags like #WhoShotDrew rising as fans debated Scout's role. The mystery captivated the community, uniting them in a common quest for answers. As the investigation progressed, the focus switched to Scout's mental state. Child psychologists were called in to see whether a girl her age could be driven to such drastic measures. They identified her sadness, isolation, and continual instability as probable factors. Scout's devotion for her mother had been a distinguishing feature of her personality, and Drew's actions appeared to erase Sam's legacy at every turn. His insistence on altering their last name to Quartermaine, which was related to his political ambitions, felt like a rejection of Sam's memory. Scout, who clung to her mother's teddy bear and stories of her fortitude, suffered a terrible wound. The psychologists cautioned that a child in such a situation may act impulsively, with their emotions overriding their sense of right and wrong. The likelihood of Scout's involvement sparked concerns about Drew's own responsibility. Have his activities brought his daughter to this point? His enemies were numerous, but his disregard of Scout was a sin that cut to the core of his character. The man who had once been a hero, a Navy SEAL who put his life in danger for others, had faded into obscurity. His stay at Pentonville, where he was beaten and threatened, had hardened him, but admirers questioned whether there was more to the story. Some suggested that Drew's personality shift was caused by brain damage from his jail stint, while others hypothesized that he may not be Drew at all, an imposter resurrected by Victor Cassadine or another scheming villain. The premise was absurd, but at Port Charles, nothing was impossible. Scout became increasingly exhausted as the investigation progressed. Anna gently questioned her, her petite form overshadowed by mistrust. Scout's responses were hazy, her eyes downcast as she hugged her mother's teddy bear. She mentioned mourning her brothers and wishing to return to the Quartermaine estate, but she spoke very little about the night of the shooting. Her silence was deafening, which only reinforced the supposition. Jason Morgan, Drew's twin brother and Scout's father figure during Sam's absence, was heartbroken at the prospect that Scout was involved. He hated himself for not shielding her from Drew's influence and for not intervening sooner to keep her safe. Alexis, too, was filled with remorse, wondering if her failure to win custody had made Scout susceptible. The mystery grew deeper as more information surfaced. A partial fingerprint on the abandoned toy matched Scout's, but it was insufficient to prove her guilt. A security camera near the incident caught a brief glimpse of a child fleeing, their face disguised by a hood. The footage was shaky, but it was adequate to keep Scout in the spotlight. Anna and Dante deliberated whether to bring her in for further interrogation, and their decision weighed heavily on them. They were aware that blaming a child may splinter the community, but they also recognized that justice required answers. The strain was building, and the town was on edge, waiting for the truth to surface. In the course of the investigation, Port Charles united behind Scout. Despite their shattered ties, the Quartermaines banded together to assist her. Michael, who had his own reasons to despise Drew, determined to defend Scout even if it meant defying his uncle. Willow, still hurting from her broken marriage to Drew, reached out to Scout, offering the solace she had not received. Even Sonny, a man not known for being sentimental, melted as he thought of Scout's agony. Everyone in town, from the nurses at General Hospital to the customers at Charlie's Pub, told stories about Scout's generosity, resilience, and indomitable spirit. They refused to believe she might be a murderer, but the evidence was difficult to dismiss. As the investigation progressed, a fresh hypothesis surfaced: what if Scout hadn't acted alone? The thought that someone else had exploited her, taking advantage of her sadness and rage, gained traction. Could Monica, in her final act of rebellion toward Drew, have planned the shooting? The theory was strengthened by the discovery that Monica, despite her weak health, had the allegiance of Yuri, her faithful bodyguard, who could have carried out her desires. Or possibly Alexis, motivated by her intense love for Scout, took matters into her own hands, using Scout as a decoy to avoid suspicion. There were limitless options, and each new thought added to the mystery. The reality, when revealed, was both devastating and unexpected. Scout was present for the shooting, although she did not pull the trigger. Someone else had fired the rifle, using Scout's presence to cause confusion. The real gunman was revealed to be a character from Drew's past, a clandestine operator linked to his Navy SEAL days who sought vengeance for a failed operation. Scout had come onto the incident by chance, her toy slipping from her grasp as she fled in terror. The evidence pointing to her was circumstantial, a tragic happenstance that had almost destroyed her life. Drew luckily survived the shooting, but it forced him to confront the harm he had caused to his daughter and family. In the aftermath, Port Charles began to recover. Scout was reunited with her siblings and the Quartermaines, and her role in the family was reaffirmed. Drew, humbled by his brush with death, swore to change, to prioritize Scout and regain the trust he had lost. Alexis and Jason stood beside Scout, their devotion for her unshakable. The community, shaken by the events, banded around to support one of its own, demonstrating that even in the face of tragedy, optimism can prevail. The mystery surrounding Drew's shooting put Port Charles to the test, but it also reminded citizens of their community's resilience and the power of forgiveness. The tension in Port Charles reached a breaking point when news of the shooting spread like wildfire, and everyone began to speculate about who was responsible. Drew, still suffering from his near-death experience, found himself in the midst of turmoil once more. It was not a random act of violence, it was deliberate, calculated, and highly personal. The police first believed there were only one or two possible suspects, but as Jordan and Dante looked more, the horrifying truth emerged: there were 6 people linked to the shooting, and more could be on the way. Each fresh discovery revealed stories hidden beneath layers of betrayal, revenge, and twisted loyalty. The city was filled with rumors, and Drew wondered who in his group could want him gone so desperately. The closer the authorities got to the truth, the more deadly things became. The first name to appear was Valentine Cassadine. His enmity with Drew had been festering for months, and their disagreement over ELQ had further heated up with Drew's latest business moves. Valentine had been financially cornered, his empire was under peril, and his power was waning. Dante spotted security footage of one of Valentine's men prowling around the area many hours before the shooting. Valentine denied involvement, but his intentions were apparent. Anna attempted to defend him, but her words were ineffective against the increasing circumstantial evidence. Drew, on the other hand, was skeptical Valentine would have gone this far, but in Port Charles, devotion had its limitations, and desperation had a way of pushing people over the line. Then came the second suspect, Austin Gatlin Holt. He had been acting strangely for weeks, sneaking around and making cryptic phone calls late at night. After his ties to Mason and the Potok crime family were revealed, the police were unable to ignore his potential involvement. Mason was gone, but his underground network continued to thrive, and Austin had secrets he hadn't told anyone. Dante pressed him hard during questioning, but Austin avoided any clear answers, maintaining he had nothing to do with the shooting. However, his fingerprints on a discarded shell casing near the crime scene revealed a different narrative. Drew was troubled by the prospect that Austin had been used as a pawn, which made him wonder if Austin's allegiance had ever truly been with him, or if they'd always belonged to someone else pulling the strings. Ava Jerome, the third suspect, stunned everyone. The idea that she could be involved in the shooting sounded ridiculous at first, but Jordan discovered financial documents indicating a suspicious movement of monies from an unknown account to one of the hired gunmen. That account, followed back via several shells, led directly to a fictitious organization linked to Ava's gallery. Ava claimed she had been set up, and that someone had framed her to bear the blame. But Drew couldn't ignore their complicated relationship, especially after the ELQ shares fiasco and the continued tension over her interactions with Sunny and Nina. When questioned, Ava's distress was evident, but so did her dread, and Drew wondered if someone was using her as leverage, putting her into a perilous situation from which she couldn't escape. The fourth name was less surprising: Selena Wu. She had been circling Drew for months, trying his patience and exploring his allegiances. With the Wu family's expanding dominance in Port Charles, she had the resources to make anyone disappear without a trace. Selena's engagement in underground poker games provided her with access to information and enemies that most people could not comprehend. Dante determined that one of the shooters had ties to Selena's enforcers, and while there was no tangible evidence linking her directly, the suggestion existed. Drew thought Selena had used the shooting as a warning, attempting to frighten him into submission. But Selena, who was always collected and calculating, reminded him that she never made threats, only promises, and that if she had wanted him dead, he would not have survived. The fifth suspect, Curtis Ashford, came from Drew's own circle, which was unexpected. After everything Curtis had been through, his recuperation, the aftermath of the Metro Court shooting, and the strain on his marriage, his connection to this tragedy was difficult to understand. However, Jordan learned that someone had exploited Curtis' security company credentials to gain access to restricted areas near the shooting location. Curtis said he had nothing to do with it, but the potential that someone close to him changed his access codes added to the mystery. Drew didn't want to believe Curtis was involved, but trust had been strained between them for months, especially following the investigation into Sonny and the mob's operations. If Curtis was innocent, that meant someone was framing him; if not, Drew's circle was dissolving from within. The sixth name, Nina Reeves, was one that no one wanted to believe. Her relationship with Drew had always been complex, especially after the SEC scandal and the intense debates regarding Crimson and family devotion. Nina had attempted to rehabilitate her image and reconnect with her contacts, but Dante discovered proof that a burner phone used to coordinate the shooters was acquired with an account tied to someone in Nina's orbit. Nina sobbed during questioning, swearing she had no role in any of it, but Drew couldn't shake the notion that her involvement, whether purposeful or unintentional, was more significant than she acknowledged. Nina's relationships to Ava, Valentine, and Sonny made her position fragile, and her desire to retain what little influence she had left may have driven her to form risky partnerships. Just when everyone thought the suspect list couldn't grow any longer, Jordan revealed that there were others participating, shadow players influencing events from behind the scenes. Someone was sponsoring this operation on a much higher scale than anyone expected. The gunmen were not simply hired guns, they were members of a network. That suggested someone strong was pulling strings, potentially from outside Port Charles, and Drew had become a piece in a much larger game. Leads pointed to an out-of-town syndicate with strong ties to organized crime, implying that this wasn't only about vengeance or profit, but also about power, leverage, and breaking alliances one by one. Jason Morgan, who had returned to town in the midst of the pandemonium, stepped in to protect Drew, despite the fact that old wounds remained between them. Jason's intuition told him there was more to this than anyone recognized, so he started working his own contacts to find out the truth. He advised Drew to be cautious, knowing full well that those behind the shooting would not stop until they got what they wanted. Drew hesitated at first, unsure whether to fully trust Jason, but as the danger worsened, he had no choice. Jason's mysterious past and extensive ties in the underworld offered them an advantage that the cops couldn't match. Meanwhile, tensions between Sonny and Drew rose as Sonny wanted answers about why someone carried out such a daring attack in Port Charles without his knowledge or approval. Drew argued that he was not to blame for the pandemonium, but Sonny was not convinced. The chance that one of Sonny's rivals was behind the plot raised the stakes even higher. If the shooters were linked to another syndicate attempting to encroach on Sonny's turf, everyone in Port Charles was at risk. The shooting was more than simply an isolated occurrence, it was a warning shot in an impending conflict. As the research progressed, more unexpected ties surfaced. One of the ballistics reports revealed that one of the guns used in the attack was connected to a previous Metro Court robbery case that had mysteriously gone cold years before. That gun had been recorded as evidence, but somewhere along the way, it vanished from the police archives. The inference was clear, someone inside the department had been infiltrated, and Jordan began to assume a mole was passing information to the gunman. Dante, dissatisfied by the lack of solid leads, pushed harder, even going so far as to follow suspects without official permission. He knew time was running out; if they didn't discover the mastermind soon, more lives would be jeopardized. Drew was tormented by his near-death experience and couldn't shake the paranoia that had set in. Every phone call felt like a threat, and every look over his shoulder was a warning. He began doubting everyone around him, including those he had formerly trusted wholeheartedly. His relationships strained under the weight of suspicion, and his ability to think clearly deteriorated. But then came the most devastating revelation. One of the shooters admitted under duress that they weren't paid only to kill Drew, but to send a message to someone else entirely. That discovery transformed the course of the investigation, demonstrating Drew's involvement in a much bigger power battle.